Greetings from my friend's guest room in San Francisco. We are popping up to Sonoma today for a couple hours to do what you do in Sonoma. But I thought I would just hop on and say hello. It's morning for me. And just answer a couple questions from the last couple days, because today, once I get there, I don't know where the day is going to go, and I'm probably not going to be reading pleadings unless there's something huge, which I know I should knock on wood because it is Friday. A bunch of people asked a really interesting question, especially the non-U.S. folks, about the Abby Zwerner verdict. Abby Zwerner, the teacher who was shot by the 6-year-old, got $10 million from the jury yesterday, and people asked, is that money taxable? And in the U.S., the question of whether jury awards, damage awards are taxable leans mostly on what kind of damages you claim to have gotten. So there's an explicit exception or exemption rather from taxes of damages that are for personal injury. Because, you shouldn't have to pay. That's not like it's not income. You haven't gained anything because it's repaying you for your injuries. Now, what's difficult in that is emotional damages that come from personal injury versus emotional damages that don't come from personal injury. That can be sort of arguable. But typically in employment claims, and Abby Zwerner's wasn't, but thinking about like the Lively Baldoni case, if you are claiming lost wages, those are taxable because they're taxable like wages. But if it's not lost wages, if it's something else, generally it is taxable unless you can find a way around it. That is a whole nother fascinating discussion that I will put down in my book as like things people are interested in. But in terms of Abby Zwerner, I do think part of her damages were for her own personal injury, and then a lot of it was pain and suffering and emotional damages. So I'm assuming some of it is going to be exempt, but maybe not all of it. And if for those of you who are outside the United States, our tax system is incredibly complicated, and everybody gets taxed at different rates depending on how much income they have. And it's a whole thing. So she will have enough money to hire people, to hire CPAs to figure out how she can pay the least amount of taxes, because that's what we do here. Several people have asked, and I think it's a very astute question, as they were reading the order dismissing the Jed Wallace for personal jurisdiction stuff. They noticed that in the argument section, Lyman talked about really the damages that she is seeking against them, even though she calls them something else. Even though she's seeking, retaliation and she's got defamation claims, he's like, these are reputational injuries, no matter how you slice them. False light, defamation, she's got that for the statements that Friedman made. But even her retaliation claims are based on reputational damages. And so he does do a discussion here about these are all really reputational injuries if you look at them as a whole. And while that doesn't have any precedential value, and remember that a motion to dismiss is decided solely on what's in her complaint, so it doesn't take any evidence into account, I do agree with people that it's an interesting insight into how he sees this case. Because if he's looking at particularly the argument in the motion for judgment on the pleadings that Wayfarer has made, that the smear campaign was too far away from any alleged protected activity, and also, which I think is the more relevant, happened when she wasn't employed by them anymore. That means that it shouldn't be allowed to be collected as an adverse employment action set of damages. And so for the judge to say, this is all just reputational, this is just all about how she was viewed by the public, I do think could be some insight into him saying, yeah, this is not about her employment. This is not about what happened to her by virtue of working for these people. This is about her own reputation. I have always felt that the more this case was about her reputation, the harder that was going to be for her, because even assuming that they can show a smear campaign and that terrible things were happening, even if they can show that there was a purposeful attempt to make people hate her, there's just no way to say that a famous person's reputation is based on one thing. It's based on multiple things, some of which are good and some of which are bad. And so the more that gets sort of mixed up, the harder I think it is for her to prove. So, I'm not willing to jump the gun and say, oh, the judge sees what's going on here. But I do think that the judge recognizing as a legal matter that her economic harms that she's claiming are for her personal reputational injuries is some insight into the fact that he sees this as a reputation case more than he does as an employment case. As for the birthing video response, which I read last night and then promptly fell asleep, she did a very nice job. She went through all of the arguments about, like, here's why they didn't ask for it soon enough, and this is just a motion for sanctions. It's really a motion to compel, and this is not this is the harshest sanction, and all that kind of stuff. She made all those appropriate arguments to give the judge something to hang his hat on. But this paragraph that starts with "Lively now contends," this is kind of the money shot, which is like, she now says that she has to see this. Even though she never really asked to see that in the first place. She's acting like we did something wrong by not giving it to her. And then, of course, she's got the sentence at the end, which is sort of the closing argument of this letter, which is, "This is only one in a string of sanctions." I love the quote around the word sanctions. That's a nice dig. Recognizing that discovery didn't find her what she wants, so now she's going to keep us from being able to show evidence. That's the only way she's going to win. From their position, that's exactly what they'd want to argue. I did think, I assumed this was what they were going to say too, that, what's actually in the video isn't all that critical. I had said in an earlier video, they could just stipulate that he showed her a video of his wife at some point during or after the birth process, and she thought it was something it wasn't. Like, that fact is not really in dispute. And so the way that she addresses that here is to say Heath confirmed at his deposition was not an incomplete and alter excerpt. It was a separate and distinct video. This was not part of the whole video. This was its own clip. And then here's saying, this is kind of what I was trying to say, not as artfully as this. Heath does not dispute that he showed Lively a post-delivery video of his wife holding their newborn daughter. The question of precisely what she saw isn't going to matter. Like, she can't just see it all and cherry pick. And even if she did, it won't matter because he will get up there and testify, "That's not what I showed her." So it's all about credibility anyway. And so all of this is moot, which is what makes the most sense to me. And she has argued it here quite well. Then she goes into all these sanctions are crazy. This is why are we going to the nth degree, which I think is nice. She did that at the beginning, and then she kind of did it again at the end. Now, she did throw just a few words in here to say, "to the extreme distress of Natasha Heath." Now, we have not had Natasha Heath inject herself in this, which I wouldn't expect that she would, because I assume she's saying, to her husband and their lawyers, like, "Can you please do this so I don't have to inject myself in this?" But that to me feels like, Ellen Garofalo has some inside information. Like, yes, this is very much distressing her. And I don't think you need to be a lawyer to understand that when you're telling an old, white male judge that you're asking someone to turn over a birthing video and the woman who's in it is really upset, he's going to be really reluctant to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. And honestly, the more of these motions I read and the more of their responses I read, and I kind of get an idea of the whole picture, the more I think they might be giving the judge an excuse to grant the motion for judgment on the pleadings or the motion for summary judgment, whatever it is, on the Wayfarer side. Because by filing these sanctions motions, the Lively team is telling the judge, we do not have all of the evidence that we think we deserve. And so usually summary judgment or motion for judgment on the pleadings can be denied because it's like, I don't want to cut this case short before there's a chance for everybody to see the evidence. But she's telling them they don't have the evidence. She's saying that's Wayfarer's fault. But I'm not sure it's having the ultimate effect she necessarily wants it to have. I guess we'll find out. But I can definitely see the judge reading this and being like, well, you're telling me that you can't prove these things and you want an adverse inference, but you know what I could just do instead? I could just throw the whole fucking thing out. So I don't know, time will tell. But that's my morning talk for today. Wish me luck on my wonderful day in Sonoma and then come home and then go to Dochi. I hope I make it. Coffee involved. Have a good day.